December 7th, 1941. 08:15 a.m., 10,000 feet above the island of Oahu. The cockpit of the Aichi D-3A Val dive bomber smells of high-octane fuel and the frantic sweat of Petty Officer Second Class Kaido Sato. Below him, the Pacific Fleet is draped in a shroud of black, oily smoke that reaches up like the fingers of a drowning giant. Sato watches as a 1,760-pound armor-piercing bomb from a nearby plane strikes the USS Arizona, triggering a magazine explosion so violent it lifts the 33,000-ton battleship out of the water. To Sato, and the hundreds of Imperial Japanese Navy pilots swarming the skies, this is the end of an empire. They have been told by their commanders and by the propaganda broadcast from Tokyo that Pearl Harbor is not just a base, it is the heart of the American spirit. And today they have ripped it out, as Sato banks his aircraft to return to the carrier. Japanese aircraft carrier Akagi, he looks back one last time. He sees the USS West Virginia settled in the mud, her superstructure a twisted wreckage of steel. He sees the USS Oklahoma capsized, her hull looking like the belly of a dead whale. In his mind, and in the minds of the Imperial General Staff, the math is simple. The United States is a nation of shopkeepers and luxury seekers. To rebuild this, to dredge these gargantuan steel corpses, to repair the shattered dry docks, to replace the millions of gallons of burning fuel would take 10 years, maybe 20. By the time the first American rivet is replaced, the greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere will be an unshakable reality. Fast forward to June 1942. The humid air of the Midway Atoll is thick with the scent of burning rubber and salt. Sato is no longer in a cockpit. He is in the churning, lukewarm water of the Pacific, clinging to a piece of debris from the sunken Akagi. The invincible Kido Butai has been shattered. Picked up by a U.S. Navy destroyer, the USS Phelps Sato becomes one of the few hundred Japanese survivors of the disaster at Midway. He is a prisoner of war, stripped of his rank and his pride, but he holds on to one consoling thought. Even if we lost the carriers, the Americans are crippled. They have no base to return to. Their Pacific heart is still a graveyard. For months, Sato is moved between temporary holding pens. He hears whispers from other POWs, stories of American weakness, of a nation on the brink of collapse. But in November 1942, Sato and a group of 50 other Japanese prisoners are marched onto the deck of a transport ship. Their destination, the mainland United States, for permanent internment. To get there, the ship must make a logistical stop. As the transport ship approaches the Hawaiian Islands, the Japanese prisoners are allowed on deck under heavy guard. The guards are silent, their M1 Garands slung over their shoulders. Sato stands at the rail, his eyes narrowing as the familiar silhouette of Diamond Head appears on the horizon. He prepares himself to see the ruins. He expects to see the charred skeletons of Battleship Row, the quiet, rusted remains of a defeated outpost, and perhaps the meager attempts of a desperate nation to salvage what little they have left. But as the ship rounds the entrance to Pearl Harbor, the silence of the prisoners is broken not by a command, but by a collective, audible gasp. Sato's grip tightens on the railing until his knuckles turn white. The graveyard is gone. In its place is an industrial monster that seems to breathe fire and steam. The water, once choked with debris and the blood of December, is now crowded with more ships than Sato saw at the height of the Japanese offensive. The air isn't quiet. It's a cacophony of pneumatic hammers, the blinding blue flash of arc welders, and the deep guttural roar of massive cranes. Sato looks toward Battleship Row. He rubs his eyes, certain that the tropical heat is playing tricks on his mind. There, sitting in the very spots where they were supposed to be rotting in the mud, are the ghosts. The transport ship glides past the wreckage of the USS Arizona, the only ship the Americans have left as a tomb. But everywhere else, the scene is one of terrifying vitality. Sato looks at the USS West Virginia. He had watched her sink. He had seen the fires consume her superstructure until she was a blackened husk. Yet, there she is, floated, patched, and surrounded by a swarm of workers who look like ants colonizing a fallen giant. The sound is what haunts him first. In the Imperial Japanese Navy, work was orderly, ritualistic, and often limited by the manual labor of sailors. Here, the Americans have unleashed a mechanical storm. Massive whirly cranes on railroad tracks groan as they lift 50-ton steel plates as if they were sheets of paper. The rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of pneumatic riveting guns sounds like a relentless barrage of machine gun fire. Sato turns to a fellow prisoner, a veteran petty officer named Tanaka, whose face has gone pale. "They told us the dry docks were destroyed," Tanaka whispers, his voice trembling. "They told us the Americans would have to retreat to San Diego." Sato looks toward dry dock number 1. It is not destroyed. It is occupied. The USS Pennsylvania, which Sato's squadron had harried during the raid, is sitting high and dry, her hull being scraped and repainted by hundreds of laborers. Beyond the docks, the massive fuel oil tank farms, the very ones Sato's commanders had decided were not worth the torpedoes, stand tall and untouched. They are the lifeblood of this base, and because they survived, the American fleet never had to leave. The realization begins to sink in, cold and heavy. Japan had won a battle, but they had awakened a factory. As the prisoners are marched off the ship and onto the docks of Ford Island, they see something even more demoralizing: the workforce. Sato expects to see weary, beaten down laborers. Instead, he sees thousands of men and women in denim overalls, their faces smudged with grease, moving with a purposeful, frantic energy. He sees women operating heavy machinery, a sight unthinkable in the rigid hierarchy of Imperial Japan. He sees the Ghost Fleet being upgraded with new radar arrays and anti-aircraft batteries that look like forests of steel. One of the American guards, a young corporal with a Kansas accent, notices the prisoners staring. He doesn't shout or mock them. He simply points toward the massive USS Maryland, which is already preparing to head back to sea. He pulls a bar of Hershey's chocolate from his pocket, takes a bite, and shrugs. To the Americans, this miracle of reconstruction isn't a miracle at all. It's just the job. Sato looks at the chocolate, then at the battleship, then at the endless mountains of supplies stacked on the piers, crates of ammunition, barrels of fuel, mountains of canned rations. He remembers the meager supplies on the Akagi, the way his mechanics had to scavenge for spare parts. The Japanese doctrine of seishin, spiritual superiority, had taught Sato that the spirit of the warrior could overcome any material disadvantage. But as he stands in the shadow of a rebuilt Pearl Harbor, surrounded by the infinite roar of American industry, he realizes the terrifying truth: you cannot fight a spirit that is backed by 10 million tons of steel and a workforce that never sleeps. The mathematics of the war have shifted, and for the first time, Petty Officer Sato feels the first cold touch of certain defeat. November 15th, 1942. Pier 8, Pearl Harbor Navy Yard. The prisoners are led through the heart of the shipyard to reach the transport train. For Sato, every step is a revelation of Imperial Japan's greatest intelligence failure. To the high command in Tokyo, Pearl Harbor was a target to be neutralized. To the Americans, Pearl Harbor was an ecosystem. Sato stops for a brief moment as a massive flatbed truck rumbles past, carrying a single, enormous steam turbine. Beside it, a group of women in welding masks, faces hidden behind dark glass, ignite their torches simultaneously. The blinding blue light flickers against the rusted steel of a destroyer. In Japan, women were the keepers of the home, the silent supporters of the front. Here they are the front. They are building the very weapons that will eventually strike the Japanese mainland. This total mobilization of society, not just of soldiers, but of mothers, sisters, and daughters, is a concept so alien to Sato that it feels more threatening than any naval cannon. As they reach the inland side of the harbor, Sato sees the legendary tank farms. On December 7th, his commanders had called them secondary targets. Now he sees the scale of that mistake. Thousands of pipes, thick as redwood trees, snake across the hills, pumping the lifeblood of the Pacific Fleet into every dock and pier. Because these tanks were spared, the American Ghost Fleet didn't just survive, it thrived. The prisoners are loaded into a train that will take them across the island to a temporary camp before their final voyage to the American mainland. Through the windows, Sato watches the infrastructure of Oahu. He sees new airfields being paved in mere days. He sees miles of telephone wire being strung by crews of engineers who work with a speed that defies logic. He realizes that when Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto said he feared they had awakened a sleeping giant, he wasn't speaking in metaphors. He was speaking about the American industrial machine. For the American viewer watching this today, This scene is a reminder of a time when the entire nation shared a single heartbeat. The roar of the pneumatic hammers wasn't just construction, it was a message that for every ship Japan sank, 2 more would take its place. For every plane shot down, 10 more would roar off the assembly lines in Detroit and Wichita. Sato rests his head against the cold glass of the train window. He thinks of his family in Yokohama. He thinks of the small, handcrafted workshops of Japan where skilled artisans spent weeks on a single component. He looks out at the endless, standardized, mass-produced power of the United States. The war is no longer a duel between warriors. It is a collision between a sword and a locomotive. And as the train pulls away from the bustling, rebuilt docks of Pearl Harbor, Sato closes his eyes, knowing that the locomotive has only just begun to pick up speed.